Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us today for Your Story, Disability Legal Support and Legal Aid Queensland's webinar. Before we start, we would just like to acknowledge and respect the Turrbal and Yugara people as the First Nations custodians of the land where our office stands today, and would like to pay our respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits. Just letting everyone know that today's session is being recorded and it will be available on Legal Aid Queensland's YouTube channel afterwards. I'd like to welcome Steve. Steve and Legal Aid Queensland ran a webinar at the end of last year, so if you logged into that, then we're lucky to have Steve join us again for an update on Your Story Disability Legal Support. As mentioned, today's webinar is being recorded. If you'd like further information about Legal Aid Queensland or Your Story, please visit the individual websites. And if you have any technical help, the software we're using today is GoToWebinar, and you can log in online to request help from that platform. We have quite a few handouts available to download today, so please feel free to expand the toolbar and download those. We'll be holding our questions until the end, so if you would like to just hold those, or you can enter them along the way, and once we call for questions, we'll be able to open that out, and again, that's in the toolbar there. Now, we do have Auslan interpreters joining us today, so I would like to thank them. We are just waiting for our live captioner to join in, but just like to let you all know that if they are unable to make it, then we will be captioning the webinar afterwards, so it will be accessible to be read on our YouTube channel. All right, I'm going to go through a poll. We're just interested to ask you a few questions before we start the presentation. It's completely up to you if you'd like to answer this one. Are you of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander origin? Okay, close that poll. It's just for our own records. We're also interested to know whereabouts you're working from today. If you're working regionally, in Far North Queensland or Southeast Queensland. I can see we've got actually quite a few people from outside of Queensland as well. All right, I'll share those results just in case you're interested too. I've got a lot of people from Southeast Queensland, from regional Queensland, and as mentioned, from outside of Queensland as well. Has anyone shared your story with the Disability Royal Commission, or have you supported a client or somebody else to share their story? Okay, most people haven't shared a story or supported somebody to share a story, so hopefully we'll be able to help you with how to do that today. I'll share those results. And for those of you who answered yes, did you help them with a submission, a private session, a public hearing or forum, counselling, advocacy or legal support? This just helps Steve direct the presentation today. I'm just trying to get a little bit of an understanding about your experience with your story. Great, a lot of people have shared a submission. I'm I'm going to pass over to Steve to run through the presentation this morning. So thanks again, Steve, for joining us and for working on this webinar together between Your Story and Legal Aid Queensland. And we've just got word that our live captioner will be able to join us shortly. So I do apologise if anybody was relying on that this morning, and we will make sure to get the first part of the webinar captioned as soon as possible so that you don't miss out on too much of that today. All right, over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for everyone who is attending today and taking the time out of your busy schedules to inform yourself a bit about the Disability Royal Commission and Your Story Disability Legal Support. Today we're going to cover four main topics. We're going to talk a little bit about what the Disability Royal Commission is all about. We're going to discuss what our service, Your Story Disability Legal Support, does. We're going to inform you about how you can refer your clients to us. And we can also discuss when we might refer our clients to you and your services. So to start off, a couple of key messages that we would like to share today. The first is that the Disability Royal Commission has a very broad scope. For those of you who may have gone on to the Disability Royal Commission's website or otherwise be aware of their terms of reference, they are very broad, and that gives a lot of scope and opportunity for people to share their experiences with the Royal Commission. Second key message we want to deliver today is that Your Story Disability Legal Support operates a no wrong law policy. And really what that means is that if a client approaches our service or is referred to our service, or if someone calls our service on behalf of a client, we're going to do our utmost to make sure that if the client presents to our service with an issue that is unrelated to the Disability Royal Commission, or if a client presents to our service with mixed issues, Disability Royal Commission, needing advice on the Disability Royal Commission and perhaps some other legal issues that might be bound up with the story that they want to share with the Royal Commission or might be completely separate, we'll do our utmost to make sure that we make appropriate referrals for that client so that they can receive the support and the advice that they need. So what is the Disability Royal Commission? Most of you will be, I suspect, familiar with the concept of Royal Commissions. We've had a few recently. We've got a couple going right now, but the Disability Royal Commission was established in April 2019, and the government decided to establish the Royal Commission in response to widespread reports and concerns about violence against and neglect, abuse and exploitation of people with disability. And in fact, that's exactly what the Disability Royal Commission is investigating: violence, neglect, abuse and exploitation of people with disability. But the Royal Commission, commensurate with its terms of reference, which, as I said, are broad, is investigating violence, neglect, abuse and exploitation of people with disability in all settings and contexts, in the past and in the present. It does have some focus areas, which I'll touch on in a moment, but for the purposes of advising and supporting your clients, it's really any violence, neglect, abuse or exploitation occurring at any time and in any place. The Royal Commission is also taking a very broad view of disability, and for all intents and purposes, it's working on a definition of disability as any kind of impairment. And the aim of this Royal Commission is to recommend ways to improve laws, policies, structures and practices to protect people with disability, and we all hope and expect to foster a more inclusive society in Australia for people with disability. And it is, of course, a national inquiry, and it is conducting its investigation throughout Australia and all of the states and territories. So we've got some examples of the settings and context that the Royal Commission is investigating. And that includes how and how often people with disability experience violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation in schools, jails and detention centres, in secure disability and mental health facilities, in group homes and boarding houses, in family homes, in hospitals and health facilities and in day programs. And remember, those are just examples. The scope of the Royal Commission's investigation is broader than that, but those are some examples of the areas that the Royal Commission is investigating. It's also focusing on experiences of First Nations people with disability, women with disability, culturally and linguistically diverse people, including migrants with disability, and LGBTIQ+ people with disability. It's investigating people's experiences of discrimination, demotion and termination of workers with disability. It's looking at issues relating to job support and career progression, and also transitions from school to work, from one job to another, and transitioning to retirement. Again, they're examples. That's not an exclusive list of what the Royal Commission is investigating, but it gives you a sense, I think, that really the Royal Commission is, its investigation is very broad. And no one need be too concerned about whether or not the experiences of a client that you may be working with really fall within the terms of reference. If they have a disability, or if they're sharing an experience about a person with a disability, a person with any kind of impairment, it's going to be within the terms of reference and relevant. Thank you. So here are some Disability Royal Commission fast facts. And this information is available on the Disability Royal Commission website. But as at the 27th of April, the Royal Commission had received over 4,300 submissions. It's published 14 issues papers. It's held 967 private sessions. It's conducted 22 public hearings, even in spite of COVID. It's published 5 progress reports, and it's scheduled a further 11 public hearings each month until the end of this year, December 2022. So public hearings would probably be the forum that most people associate with a Royal Commission, because we see the images of the hearings on the television and reports about public hearings in the media. It's not the only way that the Royal Commission gathers its information, but public hearings will be probably the forum that most people will be familiar with, because it's visible, particularly in the media. And the format of the public hearing resembles a court. It's not quite like a court, but it resembles a court. Public hearings are presided over by Royal Commissioners themselves. There are 7 Royal Commissioners in the Disability Royal Commission, and counsel assisting the Royal Commission, lawyers appear, witnesses give evidence and can be asked questions by the lawyers. And some of the topics that have been investigated at public hearings are listed here: inclusive education, living in group homes, healthcare and services with people with cognitive disability, experiences of people with a disability during the pandemic and the COVID-19 rollout, psychotropic medication, behaviour support and behaviours of concern, barriers to accessing a safe, quality and inclusive education and life course impacts, First Nations people with a disability and their families in contact with child protection systems, pathways and barriers to open employment for people with disability, education and training of health professionals in relation to people with cognitive disability, the experiences of people with cognitive disability in the criminal justice system, and preventing and responding to violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation in disability services. So the public hearing program has been quite extensive in spite of COVID, and it's covering, as you can see there, a really broad range of topics. So, as I mentioned, the Royal Commission began in April 2019. Last year, after significant lobbying from the Royal Commission itself and also people in the disability sector and the wider community, the deadline for the Royal Commission has been extended from April this year to 29 September 2023. A significant reason for that was the interruption to the Royal Commission's program due to the restrictions associated with COVID-19. I think also because the breadth and extent of the Royal Commission's work really pointed to the need for additional time for it to conduct its investigation and prepare its report. So now the Royal Commission will end on the 29th of September next year, 2023, and on that date, the Royal Commission's final report, including its recommendations, will be delivered to the Governor-General and ultimately to government to consider those recommendations and we all hope implement them. Last year, there were amendments to the Royal Commission Act to boost privacy protections for people giving information to the Royal Commission. Those amendments became law on the 10th of September 2021. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those amendments mean later in the webinar. But those amendments were also in response to a significant effort in the disability sector and the wider community to boost the privacy protections, to give people confidence that they can share their story with the Royal Commission in a way that does not become or cannot become released or disclosed to others. We'll talk more about that later in the webinar. Very importantly, recently, the Royal Commission has announced 2 very important dates. They are that registrations for private sessions close on the 30th of June this year, 2022, and the final date for submissions is at the end of December this year, the 31st of December 2022. We'll talk a little bit more about private sessions and submissions, but very important when you are working with clients to bear in mind those closing dates. Of course, the registration for private sessions is getting fairly close, and the final date for submissions at the end of this year, still leaving plenty of time for people to prepare and lodge submissions. So just a little bit of background about the concerns that gave rise to those amendments. The privacy protections for people who were lodging voluntary submissions, whether they be written or oral submissions, were fairly limited. And there were significant concerns in the community about the ability for submissions in particular to be accessed once the Royal Commission ended. And there was a significant campaign for change that came from the community advocates, and the Royal Commission itself was urging those changes. So happily, the government introduced legislation which was passed by the Commonwealth Parliament to extend those confidentiality protections past the end of the Royal Commission. And for those interested in the detail, there was a new section inserted into the Royal Commission Act, section 6OP. And really the effect of those amendments are that any statements or documents given to the Royal Commission in the form of submissions do not become admissible, are not admissible as evidence in court in either civil or criminal proceedings, and it may be unauthorised use or disclosure of the information given to the Royal Commission an offence. There is an exception that remains in the legislation that permits the Disability Royal Commission itself to disclose some information that is received by the Royal Commission if that information discloses the commission of a serious criminal offence. It's very unlikely that that would occur, and the Royal Commission has given indications that that wouldn't happen without first coming back to the person that made such a disclosure. But an example might be if a submission disclosed information that gave the Royal Commission concerns that, for example, a child might be at risk. In that event, the Royal Commission may share that information with relevant law enforcement authorities in order to protect the safety of a child. So those amendments apply when a person lodging a submission wants that information to be confidential, and that the information contains an account of their own or someone else's experiences, including systemic experiences of violence, abuse, neglect, or exploitation, and identifies the person who gave the information or the person on whose behalf the information was given. And the changes apply retrospectively to confidential submissions, but the amendments do not include organisations, but do apply to people giving information on their own or someone else's behalf. The amendments specifically protect information about policies and procedures or practices. So people who wish to make recommendations about systems and flaws and problems in systems, those types of submissions, including that type of content, are included if a person wishes that to remain confidential, and would, for example, cover an employee giving information about a workplace practice. So how does one take advantage of those protections? Well, if someone was lodging their written submission or uploading an oral submission online, they would, on the Disability Royal Commission website, they would select restricted on the submission form. Or if they were lodging their submission in another way, by email or by post, they can mark each page of their submission confidential, or include in a covering email sending a submission to the Royal Commission that the submission is to be treated confidentially. And if the submission is already made confidentially, nothing is required to be done at all. So fairly simple. For people who are lodging submissions on the Disability Royal Commission, there are other options available to mark in the event that someone does not wish their submission to be confidential. So we talked a bit about submissions. That will probably be the main way that most people will engage with the Disability Royal Commission. As I said, submissions can be in writing, they can be made orally, they can be made in the form of an audio or video recording, they can be made over the telephone by telephoning the Disability Royal Commission direct. They can be even in the form of artwork or poetry or drawings or pictures. So the Royal Commission is taking a very broad approach, endeavouring to be as accessible as possible to people to communicate and share their experiences in a way that is comfortable and safe and appropriate for them. The other way that people can share their experiences and their stories with the Royal Commission is by participating in a private session. Private sessions are conducted by one of the 7 Royal Commissioners. They are a way of engaging with the Royal Commission that offers the highest level of privacy protections, and information shared in a private session is not made public in any way and is not published on the Royal Commission's website or included in its reports in a way that would identify the person. Many people have elected to participate in a private session. The Royal Commission, as I mentioned, has announced that the closing date for registrations for private sessions is at the end of June this year. Private sessions will continue to be conducted beyond that date, but only if a person has registered prior to the closing date to participate in a private session. Private sessions aren't granted as of right. The information that is sought to be given in a private session needs to fall within the terms of reference of the Royal Commission, but the Royal Commission has said that it will do everything it can to grant people who register for a private session a session before the close of the Royal Commission. Another way that people may engage with the Royal Commission and provide information and evidence is by responding to a notice to produce. The Royal Commission has powers to require people to give evidence and to produce documents. That will be unusual for, I think, for most of our clientele, but there are some circumstances where an advocate or a lawyer may actually request the Royal Commission to issue a notice to produce, but the circumstances in which that is appropriate are probably less likely to occur now that the confidentiality protections have been boosted with those amendments that we've talked about. And of course, the other way that people will share their information with the Royal Commission is by giving evidence at a hearing, at a public hearing. So what is Your Story Disability Legal Support all about? Well, our service provides legal advice and assistance to people who want to share their story with the Disability Royal Commission. It's important to note that we are independent of the Disability Royal Commission. For those who are interested in the money side, we're funded by the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department, and our service is delivered in a fairly novel way by what we call National Legal Aid, which is effectively a consortium of all of the legal aid commissions in all of the states and territories collaborating together to deliver a national service, and the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Services. So there are some things that we don't do, but fortunately there are more things that we do than we don't do. So we do give information about the Disability Royal Commission. For many people, the concept of a Royal Commission, let alone participating in it, will be unfamiliar. So a lot of the work that we do is giving people information. We do provide legal advice and assistance. We prepare clients for private sessions and provide legal support at private sessions. We can help prepare submissions, and consistent with our no wrong door policy, when appropriate and when people present with legal problems or issues, we can make referrals to other organisations. We don't provide legal representation at public hearings. There might be a couple of exceptions, but as a general rule, we don't provide representation at public hearings. But what we do is maintain a panel of private law firms who are willing to represent people at public hearings who have been summoned to appear as a witness, and that there is a panel in each state and territory of private law firms who are willing to undertake that work, and they get a grant of legal aid to do that work through the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department. And we also don't provide legal advice to organisations or people making a submission on behalf of an organisation. So for those of you who are supporting people in the community, either as lawyers or community workers, advocates or counsellors, there may be occasions when you consider it might be appropriate to refer your client to Your Story Disability Legal Support for legal advice or information. Now, not everyone will need legal support before engaging with the Royal Commission, but here are some examples where it might be a good idea to get some legal advice and support. If your client has concerns about confidentiality or privacy, if your client wanted to name a person or organisation, for example, an employer or a colleague in their story or a submission, is a whistleblower, or has a confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement, an employment agreement, professional obligations or non-publication orders that stops them or may stop them telling part or all of their story. Some people may be concerned about retribution or payback that may impact them or someone else, typically in employment contexts, but maybe have concerns about safety, access to services, or some other fundamental rights. If a person has past, present, or impending employment law proceedings and wants to make a submission, it could be a good idea to refer them to get advice, or is worried about other people, for example, an employer or a colleague seeing their submission. And for people in prison, a detention centre or secure mental health facility, we provide services to them to be able to help them prepare their submissions or request a private session. Those are that's not an exclusive list of when it might be appropriate to refer a client to Your Story disability legal support, but it is some examples of where it would be appropriate. So we have a special focus for people in closed environments, that is in prisons, young people in detention centres and people in secure mental health facilities. And our service is specifically funded to help people in those closed environments engage with the Royal Commission. So our jurisdictional solicitors, I'm the Queensland jurisdictional solicitor, and I have a counterpart in every state and territory, and a First Nations counterpart in every state and territory, can provide legal advice about the Royal Commission, particularly about the safest way to share their story, to help prepare and lodge a submission, to help request and prepare for a private session, and to provide advice and referral in connection with any ancillary legal issues. The Royal Commission established a service, a telephone service that enables prisoners in Queensland to make a free call to Your Story, and also to counselling services on the prison auto dial system. So that system is working very well in Queensland, and has been rolled out in other states and territories as well. But we've been operating in Queensland was the first state where that was established, and we've been operating throughout the Queensland prisoners, providing, I think, a really good service to prisoners who often have ancillary legal issues to consider, as well as making submissions about not only conditions in imprisonment, but their experiences over the course of their lives that may have led them to come into contact with the justice system.
I might take over here, Steve, and run a poll. And we did ask this question last year, so if you did join us for the webinar last year, you would have heard this one. Tom works for an organisation that provides services to people with a disability. Tom wants to tell the Royal Commission about some of the things that concern him about work practices and attitudes. And we're just interested to know what you think. Should Tom get legal support? It would be a good idea, or no, he doesn't need legal support. Okay, I'll close it off there. And all of you have the same answer here. It would be a good idea for Tom to get legal support. So I'm going to hand back over to Steve to elaborate on this one.
So yeah, Tom's working in an organisation providing services to people with disability. He's got concerns about some of the work practices and attitudes. Tom might have some concerns about retribution, payback. He might have concerns about others in his organisation, finding out about what he wants to say to the Royal Commission. So yes, you all got it 100% right. It would be a good idea for him to get some advice. We can take him, Tom, through the various ways which he may share his experiences with the Royal Commission, and in particular give him advice about his options to ensure that what he wants to say to the Royal Commission is kept confidential to avoid the risk of others finding out about what he wants to say. So yes, if you're supporting or representing Tom, refer him to Your Story Disability Legal Support, and we'll be happy to assist Tom.
Thanks, Steve. Steve will go through the referral options with you now.
Yeah, so essentially 2 ways to refer someone to Your Story Disability Support. We refer to warm and cold referrals. Warm referrals are when you are, and forgive me if I'm telling people what they already know, but a warm referral is where typically you are with a client, and with your client, you telephone us on our info line, explain the circumstances, and our friendly and highly skilled client intake officers will take the necessary information and book an appointment with our legal team or a jurisdictional solicitor. A cold referral really is where there may, you judge that there may not be a need to make a warm referral, and simply visit our website and complete our online referral form. The details are there on screen and in the handouts. And of course, just remembering before you refer anyone to our service, it's necessary to obtain your client's consent to do that. And completed referral forms can be emailed or lodged online. So when someone presents to Your Story with legal problems or issues that are unrelated or in addition to what it is that they want to share with the Royal Commission, we will always try and make an appropriate referral. Often that will be internally to Legal Aid Queensland. It could be to Legal Aid Queensland's network of preferred suppliers throughout the state. It could be to the Queensland Law Society to obtain a referral to a private firm. It could be to community legal centres, and it could be to the network of disability advocates or disability counsellors who are also funded to provide specific services to people who wish to engage with the Royal Commission. I won't go through this in detail, but there is a list of the types of legal problems that Legal Aid Queensland can help with in criminal, family and civil law. It's quite an extensive list. That information is available on Legal Aid Queensland's website, but yeah, significant range of legal issues that we can provide advice and in some cases legal representation for people. So that will normally be our first port of call for making a referral for people who present with legal issues in any of those areas of law. So today's top takeaways. It's important to remember that the Disability Royal Commission is not a court. even though, especially in public hearings, the Royal Commission takes evidence, the Royal Commission is not requiring people who engage with the Royal Commission to prove what it is to prove any of their experiences that they are wishing to share. The Royal Commission just wants to hear their truth. As I mentioned, there is free counselling and advocacy services available throughout the state. Your Story Disability Legal Support can refer clients to counselling and advocacy services. And I think one key thing to remember is that if you have any doubt about a legal issue or problem connected with your story, connected with the Royal Commission, then please refer your client to Your Story and we'll be happy to assist. And a reminder that registrations for private sessions close on the 30th of June this year and submissions close on the 31st of December. So now is the time for you and your clients to share their story and ideas for change and or support someone else to do just that.
Thank you, Steve, for that great presentation. We're going to open up for questions now. So while we're letting those come through, we do have someone who asked a question ahead of the webinar. So I'm going to read that out to you now, Steve. Can NDIS provide additional support? So to give you a bit of context, for example, a legal advocate, when a participant finds themselves as a legal aid client represented by a lawyer and they're not conversant with specific disability support needs.
Okay, so if I understand that question correctly, it is really asking whether or not a lawyer could have access to a client's existing advocate. Whether or not the NDIS provides funding for an advocate is perhaps less important, I think, than the premise of the question, which is if a person has an advocate, should the lawyer talk to them? If I'm understanding that question correctly. And the answer is I think that if a lawyer is acting for a client with disability, it is certainly possible for that client's advocate to be part of the process, provided that the client consents to that. And normally a lawyer would be very keen to utilise the support of an existing advocate to assist the client to provide instructions and understand advice. And of course, there will be many occasions in court proceedings where the support and information, background information that can be provided by an advocate will be crucial. So for any advocate who is aware that their client needs legal advice and support or representation, it's important that the lawyer is made aware that their client has an advocate and is given an opportunity with the lawyer's client's consent to communicate with the advocate and to use the background information and the support that the advocate can provide to support an effective relationship between the lawyer and their client, and to produce potentially important background information or even evidence in a client's case. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but certainly it's important for lawyers to be made aware of the existence of advocates or indeed for the need for an advocate, and most lawyers will be in a position to make inquiries and refer clients to an advocate if that is considered appropriate.
And Steve, if someone does have an advocate or doesn't have an advocate and would like one, can an advocate attend when giving evidence at a hearing?
At a hearing of the Disability Royal Commission?
Yes.
Yes, certainly the Royal Commission is permitting support people to be present during private sessions. And I would imagine also if a person is giving evidence at a public hearing of the Royal Commission. And the Royal Commission also has staff that do provide and are specially trained to provide support and counselling for people who are engaging with the Royal Commission. So it has its own internal processes, procedures and supports available for people engaging with the Royal Commission.
Thank you, Steve. And are you able to just paint a bit of a picture for us here about what a private session would look like?
Okay, so private sessions are conducted by one of the 7 Royal Commissioners. Previously, if possible, they were face-to-face sessions. The intervention of COVID forced the Royal Commission to adopt different methods of conducting private sessions. The Royal Commission has indicated recently that private sessions from this point on will be conducted by audio or video conferencing facilities. And essentially that is because of the ongoing pandemic and the difficulties associated with and the logistics of face-to-face private sessions. So what they will look like is audio or teleconferences. They usually last for about an hour. People who are granted a private session will also be, prior to the private session, taken through an intake session where the process will be explained to them. They will have an opportunity to explore what supports they might need leading up to or during any private session. So there's a range of supports that are available for people. And I think the key message at this stage is that if you think that your client is going to be best served by having a private session, get in and get a registration completed before the end of June this year. And the Royal Commission has indicated that it will do everything that it can to grant private sessions that are registered before the end of June.
Thank you, Steve. And when making a voluntary submission, if somebody prefers, can they draw their submission? Can they submit something through drawing as well as?
Yes, absolutely.
Words?
The Royal Commission is willing to accept voluntary submissions in any format. And then that can include a picture. And then the Royal Commission, we understand, has received works of art which can communicate people's experiences in a very powerful way. So it's not just words. For people who would prefer to communicate in that visual way, that is certainly an option that is available, and it's an option that has been used.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Steve. That's all the questions that we have today. I'm going to hand over to Kim to run through a couple more Your Story slides. Okay, welcome, Kim.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, my name's Kim. I'm the Senior Communications Advisor at Your Story Disability Legal Support based here in Brisbane. And I just wanted to let you know about a couple of upcoming events that we have. Tomorrow, as part of our monthly webinar series, we're going to be hosting a conversation about autism and employment with two prominent autistic women. We have Elise Muller, who is an Indigenous elite athlete and autism advocate on the autism spectrum. We also have Tammy McGowan, who is wears many hats. She is autistic and has raised two autistic children. She's also the project officer at the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network and a member of our advisory group. So this webinar is happening tomorrow at lunchtime from 12:30 to 1:30, and that's going to be hosted by two of our lawyers in South Australia, Haran and McCulley. And then next up on the 10th of May, we're going to be hosting a discussion about multiculturalism and disability. And so this is going to be 3 guest speakers offering their insights and practical tips for workers supporting people with disability from multicultural backgrounds. We've got a great lineup of speakers for that one as well. Dominic Golding, who's a Vietnamese Chinese Australian with disability, and he's also an advocate. Hosanna Chowdhury is a disability discrimination lawyer. And then Zakia Patel is a multicultural community leader. And that one's going to be hosted by our lawyer in Canberra, Audrey. So you can find out more information about those events and other events we're holding around the country on our website. The web address there is on the screen and in your handout. Steve's also going to be hitting the road for a series of information sessions around Queensland. He's actually heading off to Bundaberg shortly for an info session at 5:30, and then also going to be going to places such as Cairns, Townsville, Hughenden, Mount Isa, Rockhampton. So you can find out more information about those information sessions on our website. And just on that NDIS question, we are hosting a webinar later in May on the 30th with the Legal Aid New South Wales NDIS team. So if you're interested in finding out more about navigating the NDIS, don't miss that one. The NDIS team is going to be talking about things such as what the NDIS will and won't cover, talking about the access criteria and how to prepare for plan reviews. So again, all that information is on our website. And if you'd like to stay in touch with Your Story, we are on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you want to follow those links in the handout. You can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter. So the April newsletter will be going out shortly if you'd like to subscribe today. And we'd love to stay in touch. Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Kim. That's great to hear that Steve's hitting the road soon, and that we can find out more about your webinars. Legal Aid Queensland also have a range of webinars, so you're welcome to head to our website and find out more about those, or download our publications, which are free and can be delivered to you. Thank you so much, Steve, for such a comprehensive presentation. It was great to work together again this year. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you all again at the next webinar. Thank you.